Welcome to Fire Your Hiring Habits with John Mitchell. This is the place where we dive into the world of talent acquisition, explore the challenges of today's workplace, and discover what it takes to build a thriving and successful organization.
My guest this week is Miranda Zolot, the General Counsel at Oyster. Miranda is an experienced leader with over 20 years as an in-house legal counsel. She is a strategic business partner, hands-on manager of a diverse legal team, and a creative problem solver. At Oyster, Miranda is building a legal framework to simplify compliant global hiring, an international legal design expert, and a leader in the in-house legal community. Miranda, welcome to the podcast.
I'm so excited to be here.
So thank you again for being here. Before we get into what you do, can you tell me a little bit about Oyster's mission to enable businesses to hire talented people anywhere? With the growth of remote work and compliance, I'm assuming is more complex than ever. Give us a little flavor for it.
Yeah, no, I am excited to be here. As I mentioned, I am the general counsel for Oyster HR. Oyster is an employer of record, and that means that we work around the globe to help our customers connect and compliantly hire team members where they are. This is primarily remote work, and it's a great way to connect businesses with talent. And we're mission driven. We're focused on bringing opportunities to individuals where they sit. So it's really a great company to work for. It's an exciting time to be in this industry because, as you know, it's really challenging to find the talent necessarily that you want to grow your business where you are. And harnessing technology to be able to do that across borders is really exciting. And I've really enjoyed kind of being part of that journey for Oyster, and I'm excited to share it with other folks.
So what initially drew you to a career personally in legal counsel, especially focusing on compliance?
So I am an employment lawyer by practice and experience primarily. And employment law is exciting as far as a legal field goes, because to be a great employment lawyer, you have to really understand what the business is doing that you're advising. For me, it's a little bit like Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. The way I describe it to people is you get to go and see how you make guitars, or, I've been in steel factories to see how they make steel, how you make Oreos. Really fascinating. Even distribution centers, the technology, the way that you organize things, what the workers need and what the employers need to make the system work together, because you need both sides, right? So for me, I've always been really interested in that from a legal perspective also. But more recently, I've been working for companies that help enable businesses. And that has been incredibly fulfilling for me personally, because it takes a lot to be an entrepreneur or to manage a business. And it's very complicated. We all know that the world that we live in is becoming increasingly regulated. And it is just difficult sometimes to kind of do what you want to do as your company, your focus. And if we can help in any way by supporting that small business, that mid-sized business, that growing business, that's amazing. And that's what I've sought to do, both with my prior employer, which was a PEO, and now with Oyster, we're doing it globally. So really helping people do what they love more easily and better is really lovely.
So, I work at IPC. We're a trade association globally. We're for the electronics industry. So we're in places like, you would expect in Asia, in Munich, in India, all over the world. So what are some of the biggest compliance challenges that companies face? So I'm trying to hire across all of those geographies to help us meet the needs of the electronics industry. What are some of the biggest compliance challenges that companies face when trying to hire globally?
So I would say it kind of falls into a couple buckets, right? One, if you're just talking about hiring, how do I actually recruit that talent? And that there's a couple different levers to that. Like, where do I look? What is market? And how do I technically do it and comply with laws? We have pay transparency laws that are becoming more common here in the U.S. we're behind the 8 ball with the rest of the world, right? They have already put these in practice. You have new AI rules on how you use algorithms to look through various candidate profiles. You have data protection and privacy laws about what you can and can't ask of them to submit, how you keep it, those sorts of things. And even as strange as in some countries, when you are asking for applicants, you're going to get a resume that looks very different. You may get a resume with a picture, or you may get a resume which, you'll be like taken aback, like, oh, people actually put pictures? I thought we couldn't do that. There's all sorts of things like that when you're actually looking to hire the candidate. That is helpful if you have some knowledge about what you can and can't do. So that's the first point. How do you find the people, and how do you put them in a way that is compliant, right? And so great, you found this amazing developer in Poland. Wonderful. Okay, then what? Then you have to figure out how to hire that person. You're not going to want to set up an entity for one employee, or even probably a pod of employees. You're going to have to understand your business and what makes sense, but it's probably not going to be to set up an entity right away. So how do you go about paying them? Are they a contractor? Are they a full-time employee? What does that contract look like? What language is it in? And then how do you operationalize that employment contract? Meaning, how do you pay payroll? How do you properly pay the taxing authorities, make social contributions? It sounds all very highly technical, but it's the things that, again, you have to worry about if you want to employ that person compliantly, make sure that they don't have anything that worries them and distracts them from the work that they will be doing for you. And things do matter differently in different countries. What contracts look like, how they can use their contracts, if you are providing equipment for them, if you're paying for their electricity, things like that.
Let's jump into. I asked a very big question apparently, and so let's break it apart a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about on the finding side. You mentioned something there that intrigues me a little bit, and it's fairly new, and so maybe many of our listeners won't have had any experience in it. You talked about AI rules in how you use AI to find people or to parse resumes or whatever. What are some of the gotchas that that we should be even think? I wouldn't even have thought twice about it, because we've been seeing a lot of throughout the last 3 decades. Since we've had electronic submission of resumes, there's been low-level AI that has done like sorting based on keywords and things like that. Is that what we're talking about, or is it now this higher level stuff? Can you give us a little flavor for what some things we ought to be thinking about?
Yeah. So what I would say is there is a lot of base level AI, but there have been for the last decade, as you point, like some low level sorting that happens with a lot of tools that you might use for hiring. These are regulated and in some instances, and there's certainly an effort by those tools to prevent bias or discrimination. And as we are becoming more aware of how these tools are sexy, and therefore companies want to put them into their products to use, and B, how they do have flaws and things that may lead us to inaccurate decision making or false statements. If you have a system that relies on the AI or that has incorporated AI, you want to look at two things. Is the AI using your information to help create their models? That matters because if you have a privacy obligation to the candidates that you're looking to hire, depending on where in the world you are, you need to make sure that you are not giving personal information, identifiable information into a large language model or other AI type system. You may not think about that.
We need to make sure we're protecting information that could be consumed beyond our own company.
Absolutely. If you're using a third party and they have added AI, you don't always necessarily check those terms and conditions, or, you continue on the site to use it and don't realize, oh, they're actually now using my data. And when you're talking about hiring, then it's not even your data. It's data that a candidate has entrusted to you. So you just need to be careful of the tools that you're using. So one, how is the model using the data? And then secondly, what is it extrapolating from the data? And is it using the model to decide perhaps that this person may or may not be a minority? Like maybe you're trying to do minority hiring and it's sorting by minority, but is it doing that properly? How is it doing it? Is it doing it by name? Is it doing it by image? Is it doing by location? Like what is it looking to find? Is it validating sources? Is it trying to kind of like look into folks' information in their resume, pull out and validate places that may exist, may not exist? These are all sort of new things that they're trying to do, and it's interesting and it can be really helpful. But there are other ways that you perhaps can narrow down the field of what you're looking for without getting into it. So it's not to say you shouldn't use tools. You should just be aware of the tools that you're using and what they're doing with the information that you or your candidates are providing, because you may be held liable for what happens to your candidate's data.
As soon as you become liable for it, then now you wish you would have read that contract a lot closer.
Yeah, so that's like one of the things. But if you're looking broadly, what I will say from our experience, and we are fully distributed, and so we have our own internal team members are around 60 countries broad, and we have recruited for everything from production designers, software engineers, lawyers. Anything that you possibly could need to run a global company, we've done and hired them remotely and hired them through various systems. What you can do is create playbooks that you can use within a system if you're using a third-party one, or if you're doing it manually, if you're smaller and you're just sort of starting to hire this way. It really does make sense, and it's worth the effort to go through and create a hiring playbook that says exactly what you're looking for, why you're looking in this particular jurisdiction or not in a particular jurisdiction. So you really kind of understand your why, what you're looking for, and then that's going to help you sort. You're going to get a lot of resumes because as soon as you open it up to the world, people are hungry for opportunities, which is amazing. But you need to have really clear criteria that are going to help you sort through things that are objective and that you don't have to worry about creating any additional liability based on those criteria. And all of that only comes from a lot of thought about what is this job? What am I trying to do? And what does success look like for this job in this particular location?
In our association, we have very, very large companies and we have very, very small companies, in the electronics industry that I work with at IPC. Do the compliance needs change as companies scale internationally? You mentioned before, like, hey, if I'm hiring, a software engineer over in Poland, I think you used that example, I might not need to set up an entity. But as I start, at what point does scale start changing what you need to be doing?
Yeah, so it's a really good question. And there are a lot of variables, but there are two main variables if you want to think about it. One is numerosity and one is revenue. Each country is different and you have to look at each country individually. So let's say you wanted to hire one person in 20 different countries, not a problem. But if you wanted to hire 20 people in one country, then you might have a problem because you're looking at numerosity. And the reason why numerosity matters, or revenue, let's say you have one person that's really, really great salesman and they're bringing, tens of millions of dollars into the company out of this one location. That's going to have the same effect as, 15 to 20, 30 people working in that one location. And it comes down to the country and the jurisdiction where you are. And they need to cover their costs, right? They have tax requirements, they have corporate taxes. And so whenever your contacts with a particular country arise or grow to the point where you're either creating a lot of money off of the local economy or you have a lot of contacts as an employer or through an EOR, at that point, the country's going to look at you as a business and want you to become a responsible part of their business ecosystem. Maybe that's paying corporate taxes. Maybe that's participating in their other, various regimes. But it's going to depend on each particular jurisdiction and how much business you're doing there, either through revenues or through employment.
You mentioned as when you're hiring, it's really important to have to document the criteria. I'm assuming that's at least one of the best practices that people should do for remaining compliant across different regions. Are there other best practices to remain compliant that are applicable kind of across the spectrum that people should just from the get-go have these things in place?
Yeah, I think that there are a couple. One of them is particularly when we're talking about remote work or hiring across jurisdictions. You want to be really clear about the job that someone has signed up for doing. You want to be really aware of what the contract says. Unlike the US, almost everywhere else in the world, you need contracts. And the contracts have a couple of key terms that you just need to be aware of as an employer and make sure that you're paying attention to. How long is the probationary period? In some jurisdictions, it is very difficult to terminate someone once their probationary period has passed. So you need to be aware across your portfolio and your employment when that probationary period is done. And with regard to contracts, how long is the contract term? Is it fixed or is it renewable? These things matter. And it doesn't really matter where you are. The other thing that you need to be kind of aware of is this person an employee or a contractor? This is like fundamental sort of like hiring globally and scaling, right? Everyone wants to start as a contractor because it's easier. You're not sure what's going to happen with the company. All you need in theory is a form off the internet somewhere. And that's really simplistic. But at a certain point, does that contractor need to be converted to an employee? And you should be looking at this across your books. And depending on where you are in the world, even being a contractor has some pretty specific obligations that they need to register their entity, or you're going to get into trouble. And again, you don't want to side rail your business with employment stuff. It can get time consuming and expensive. So make sure you're hiring appropriately. And then what I would say is if you're working remotely and you have folks around the globe, while this is not compliance per se, it will go a long way in avoiding problems. Make sure that your culture of your business is set up to do that, to work remotely and work across countries. Because if you don't work well across those borders, across those time zones, you're going to have unhappy employees. They're going to not feel like they're being able to succeed. They're going to, best case, be non-productive. Worst case, you're going to have, performance issues that may lead to termination. So your, best offense is a good defense in some of these instances. And you really need to be set up to work remotely because that's hard. And if you're not, it's going to probably not be a successful endeavor.
And so many companies were thrust into working remotely due to the pandemic without being prepared. I mean, I've run into several companies that are like, oh, we can't wait to go back to work because it's just this remote thing isn't working for us. And, get back face to face. I'm like, well, you probably didn't set it up right then because it can be amazing as long as you do it planfully. But so I totally agree with that. So you talked about, the classification contractor versus full-time. How does a company know? I mean, is it really country by country that, hey, certain number of hours or a certain amount of time before or number of types of other jobs they have? I've heard many of these different things. Is there a rule of thumb or is it really, these are the things you need to be looking at country by country?
What I would say is I'm a lawyer, right? I'm going to tell you it always depends.
Yes. Yeah.
It always depends. In reality, there are some countries that are more specific than others. Some of them have more experience litigating what is a contractor or not. At the heart of it, it really matters who is in control of the work and what meaningful work outside of the engagement is the contractor doing. And there are 5-step tests and 10-step tests, but you should look and see like how many connections are there between me, the business owner, and the worker. If they're using my email, if they're not doing work for anyone else, if they have a set schedule that they are working, do they have access to all of our systems? Are they holding themselves out as an employee of us on LinkedIn? Or, no one has business cards, but like, are they using our Zoom background? All of these things that connect a worker and an employer are things that sort of, if you think about it, a scale, like, are kind of like going to tilt you towards an employer. From a contractor's perspective, do they have control over how they do the work, when they do the work? Are they working for other folks? Can they work for a competitor? All of those types of things tend to indicate that they are a contractor. And what I would say is most people aren't contractors. That's the reality. And you have to make a business decision when you're starting out. Maybe they are a contractor because you think this may last for, 6 months. You get a proof of concept and it works or it doesn't work. That's probably an okay contractor. If you get, your round of fundraising and you've like moved over, or you're successfully operating a business and you're just moving into a new jurisdiction, probably not a contractor. So it is one of those things that it's pretty clear most of the time folks are employees, the way Western companies engage them. And by Western, I'm saying US and Western European centric. Most folks are going to be deemed an employee-employer, unless you have someone that's like sort of starting off, trying to build something, doing project work, or if you have a salesperson who's just testing the market in a particular area. That's a good use case for a contractor, and they typically will be working for a couple of different businesses in order to kind of see what that market looks like. So I would say like those are the things that you can look at. How much do they have control? How much are they working with other people? Are they doing jobs that are intrinsic to the business itself? And the more times you say yes, the more connections you find, the more likelihood that this person is truly going to be an employee versus a contractor.
Excellent. Well, we've covered a lot of great ground so far, but there's more to come. In the next part of my conversation with Miranda Zolot, General Counsel at global employment platform Oyster, we'll dive into how compliance has evolved over time and where it's headed in the future.
We're operating in a digital world. Our laws are like analog. They don't meet up at all. The reality and sort of the regulation. What we're seeing across the board are not new laws. We're seeing countries trying to enforce antiquated laws.
This has been Fire Your Hiring Habits. If you want to empower your organization to reach new heights, go to johnwmitchell.com to find the techniques and tools you need to attract and retain the best team and boldly reimagine your workplace. Fire Your Hiring Habits with John Mitchell is a production of Forbes Books.